Hello everyone, welcome to Dr. Rajkumar's Learning App. Myself Puvendan, I am going to teach Indian Polity for Agneepath examination. So, the polity is very interesting subject and also it gives you more knowledge about how exactly the government is running. If you take the history of polity, particularly the constitution term, which came out from the American Constitution. After their revolution, America is the first country in the world come up with the democratic term. So based on the theme only, other European nations also started doing their constitution. So now coming back to the making of constitution chapter for our country. So you know very well about the modern history of India. The British started ruling a nation from 1773, which means exactly when the act was imposed by the British Parliament. So 1773, they'll come up with a regulating act of English East Indian Company. They wanted to regulate their commercial affairs. For that purpose, the British Parliament enacted Regulating Act of 1773. That is the first ever act or law which introduced to our country. Later on, after 1857 revolt, the government of Britain wanted to take a control of India. So that purpose, the Government of India Act 1858 was enacted. Later on, a lot of issues happened with the Indian leaders and the Indian political parties. So they wanted to regulate or else to give a mini constitution for our country to run the administration. That is the purpose of enacting Government of India Act 1935. So we'll discuss making of the Indian Constitution. What are all the concepts that we need to learn in terms of static area for your examination? So making of constitution, particularly this idea was proposed in the year of 1934 by M.N. Roy. He is a pioneer communist, ideal personality. He is the one who proposed the idea of independent constituent assembly. Constituent assembly means it's a group of elected or nominated members. They'll sit and discuss about the constitution framing work. This idea was proposed by M.N. Roy, was the first in the year of 1934. After that, the Constituent Assembly was formed as per the suggestions given by the Cabinet Mission in the year of 1946. So 1945, after the World War II, the Britain wanted to give independence to India, but India is supposed to frame their own constitution. For that purpose, the new government formed after the World War II. So, from their cabinet, British Parliament cabinet, 3 members were sent by the British government. A.V. Alexander, Patrick Lawrence, and Stafford Cripps. These 3 persons were, completely belong to the England, and they are the members of Britain Parliament. So they are exclusively pick up from the Prime Minister from their cabinet. So that this mission, which is known as Cabinet Mission. So they reached India in the year of 1946. They proposed one idea which is known as Constituent Assembly. First time the Constituent Assembly contains 2 parties, that is Indian National Congress as well as All India Muslim League. Combination of these 3 and other parties also, 389 members were there. After the partition, it is around 299 members, partially elected as well as partly nominated. Few members of the Constituent Assembly were elected directly and few other members were partially nominated. That is called partial term. So the election, July to and August 1946, the first election of Constituent Assembly was held, and it was completed in the year of 1946, and it was attended by around 211 members. So once the Constituent Assembly was formed, means we need a president to give the essence for all the acts which they are framing. The first person name called Sachidananda Sinha, become the temporary president of the Constituent Assembly, because the Indians used to sit and discuss about their laws, and someone needs to be there to give their assent. So they wanted to make one person as a temporary, which is known as Dr. Sachidananda Sinha. He is the temporary president of Constituent Assembly, which is framed by Indians. So 11th December 1946, Dr. Rajendra Prasad and H.C. Mukherjee as elected as the President and Vice President of Constituent Assembly respectively. So the first permanent president of Constituent Assembly was Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and also H.C. Mukherjee become the Vice President of Constituent Assembly. Okay, next one is Sir B.N. Rao. Okay, he was appointed as the constitutional advisor. Okay, constitutional advisor to the assembly. Whatever the law which they are framing, they need to get some advice from the pioneer. That is the reason behind appointment of B.N. Rao. Okay, on 13th December 1946, okay, our first independent India's Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru gave the OR, which is known as Objective Resolution. This Objective Resolution, that idea given by Nehru, become the essence of preamble of the Constitution. Okay, and also it was incorporated in our Indian Constitution as well. Based on the theme only, the Constituent Assembly started framing their laws. Okay, so the resolution of objectives was adopted on 22nd January 1947. So anonymously it was adopted by the Constituent Assembly. Based on that, they started framing the laws. The Constituent Assembly ratified India's membership of Commonwealth nations in the year of May 1949. Okay, Commonwealth also, okay, the membership, as well as they joined with other international organization as well. Okay, so that was ratified by the Constituent Assembly. And also it adopted national song and national anthem on 24th January 1950 and national flag adopted on 22nd July 1947. These two things also were done by Constituent Assembly only. Okay. So the assembly met for 11 sessions. It took around 2 years for the Constituent Assembly, 11 months and 18 days to frame the final draft of our constitution. Okay, remember the Constituent Assembly members sat for 141 days in total to draft our constitution, considered for 114 days. Okay, to draft our constitution, considered how many days? 114 days. Total amount of money which spent for that purpose around 64 lakh. What is the reason behind spending 64 lakh? Because our Constitutional Assembly members, they travel to different countries around the world, and they took resource from other constitution and they did patchwork in our Indian constitution. And Indian constitution is the one of the lengthiest written constitution in the world. Okay, because of getting resource from different sources. So the assembly had around 15 women members, which were reduced to 9 after the partition. Even we had the participation of women also in the making of our Indian constitution. So for the purpose of framing our constitution, many committees were appointed. So we have different committees. For your preparation, you just know what is the committee and who are all the chairmen of those committees. Okay, Union Powers Committee by Jawaharlal Nehru and Union Constitution Committee by Jawaharlal Nehru, Provincial Constitution Committee by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Drafting Committee Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Rules of Procedure Committee Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Steering Committee Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Flag Committee J.B. Kripalani. Here you may expect the father of Indian Constitution and also the chairman of Drafting Committee Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Okay, so the final draft of the Constitution was adopted on 26th November 1949. Okay, and it contained around 8 schedules, 22 parts and 395 articles. This Constitution was adopted by the Assembly 26th November 1949, but the Constitution came into effect from 26th January 1950, that is our Republic Day. The Constitution came into effect, right? So now the sources, I told you, right, our Indian leaders from the Constituent Assembly, they travel to different countries and it's a patchwork constitution. So from which country, what are all the resource was adopted by our Indian leaders and how it got incorporated in our Indian Constitution. Such British Constitution, from there we got the federal scheme, office of the governor and what are the powers, okay, judiciary and about public service commission, emergency provisions and administrative details. All these were copied from British Constitution. And the Government of India Act 1935, which was passed by the British Parliament in the year of 1935, which is considered to be the mini constitution of India. Okay, mini constitution. Based on this only, maximum laws of our Indian constitution was framed. Okay, so parliamentary form of government and rule of law, legislative procedure, single citizenship, cabinet system, okay, parliamentary privileges, bicameralism, two houses, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, okay, and writ petitions, constitutional remedies. Apart from that, US Constitution, okay, fundamental rights, very important. Magna Carta of our Indian Constitution, fundamental rights were copied from the American Constitution. Independence of judiciary, judicial review and impeachment of the president, removal of Supreme Court and High Court judges, okay, and post of vice president. So all these things that we copied from which country? US Constitution. It is not exactly copied, but we referred and we adapted based on the condition of our country during the time of 1940s. And Irish DPSP, okay, Directive Principle of State Policy, nominating the members to Rajya Sabha and method of election, president election from Irish Constitution. Canadian Constitution, about the federation, because to create a strong center is the biggest task of a nation, and residuary powers in the center itself, not in the state hand, and appointment of state governors by the center. Okay, so the governors, who is the administrative head of the state, were appointed by the center, also comes from Canadian Constitution only, and advisory of jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Okay, to take a boundary or control of the Supreme Court, because Supreme Court jurisdiction all over India. Okay, and Australian Constitution, concurrent list, freedom of trade, commerce and intercourse, and the joint of sitting two House of Parliament, which happens during the time of initiating the government or else the ending of government. Okay, next, Germany, suspension of fundamental rights during emergency. Okay, if any emergency, particularly national emergency. We have three type of emergency in Indian Constitution: national emergency, state emergency and financial emergency. Okay, so the suspension of fundamental rights during the national emergency copied from Germany. And Soviet Union, that is Russia now, fundamental duties, idea of justice, that is social, economic, political, in the preamble of the constitution was incorporated. Then French Constitution, republic ideas, okay, such liberty, equality, fraternity. These three were popularly came out from the French Revolution, that become the modern ideology also in terms of forming the government. From South African Constitution, procedure for amendment of the constitution and the election members of Rajya Sabha. Okay, and Japanese Constitution, the procedure established by the law. So from all these countries, we got many provisions to added in our Indian Constitution. Okay, so the sources and also making of Indian Constitution, as per your syllabus, this information is fair enough. Based on this only you will get questions. So we'll see some questions so that it's easy for you to understand. Okay, the first question is, when was the Constituent Assembly adopted the Constitution? Okay, when was the Constituent Assembly adopted the Constitution? Remember, you need to understand the difference between adopted and came into effect. 26th November 1949 is the adoption day of our Constitution. Came into effect, which is 26th January 1950. Okay, so don't get confused. So the Constituent Assembly adopted the Constitution on 26th November 1949. Next question is, Constituent Assembly that framed Constitution was set up under which plan? Okay, Government of India Act is mini constitution, not based on that Constituent Assembly. Then India's Independence Act of 1947, which gives independence to India and Pakistan respectively. So the two option is wrong. So two plans. I told you about the cabinet mission. 3 ministers exclusively from the cabinet of British Parliament came to India, and they were the one who gave idea related to Constituent Assembly framing. Okay, so cabinet mission plan. Based on that only, the Constituent Assembly was framed. So who was the temporary president of Constituent Assembly? Okay, here temporary and permanent. You need to know two personalities as well. Temporary is Sachidananda Sinha. Okay, and the permanent, president of the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and add on to this, the first president of independent India, Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Okay, he is the first, president of independent India as well. Okay, you can add on this as a information. Next, the fundamental rights in our constitution is taken from constitution of which country? Okay, this question comes under your sources. Bills of rights. Bills of rights. This bills of rights, which is adopted in our constitution, popularly known as fundamental rights, which copied exclusively from the United States of America. Okay, USA, which is interesting country, as I told you, introduction of democratic, and also they focused on the rights which enjoyed by the citizens. So what are the rights can be provided on the constitutional method? So we copied fundamental rights from the Bills of Rights of American Constitution. Next, the idea of preamble of the Constitution is taken from Constitution of which country? Russia, USSR. Now, which is Russia. So while going, going for the examination, you must understand about just revising the facts, and also you need to do some practice from the previous year question paper, and also you need to do a lot of mock practices of this chapter, so that it's easy for you to understand all the concepts and come up with the good marks. Okay, so we'll see next chapter.